Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this session. This is session 1, dealing with multiple pressures and biosphere stewardship. So today we have an illustrious panel of experts, very knowledgeable people in different fields. I will present them to you just by name now, and then I will give you a short bio later. We have Marta, Sevim, Arno online, whom you will see in just a moment, and Marilda. Yes. So this is the proverbial QR code for our Slido. And what we're going to ask you to do is, throughout the interventions of our panelists or my own, if you think of a question that you would like to ask us, please put it in the Slido. At the end of this, the panel discussion, you will also be asked a question on our behalf to you. I am missing, no, this is fine. Okay. So what I was going to say with an introductory slide was dealing with multiple pressures and biosphere stewardship is a mouthful. It's a very daunting challenge to discuss this in a session in a very short time, but luckily we're here with an audience who will help us and a very knowledgeable set of panel members. I mean, we've heard throughout yesterday and also a little bit this morning that we are all interconnected. So ecosystems are complex systems, they're networks, and we are a part of this, right? So if we talk about stewardship, you have to add on to this layer of the ecological network, the human network, and that means our social systems, our economy, and this picture quickly becomes, amplified exponentially. This is a relatively simple picture. It's of a pond somewhere in the Florida Everglades, but you can imagine if you've put all of Europe in a picture, all of European ecosystems, and then this society and the economy that is a part of our European life, let's say, and beyond, as we'll hear also from our colleague from FAO, then the interconnections are fairly difficult to map. Not sure where to point this. Okay. My name is Sarah Mubareka. I work at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. You've heard my DDG this morning, possibly, Sala, talk about the support of science to not only the bioeconomy file, but to several DG files. And so as a scientist, my job is to think. And I was thinking, how can I present the bioeconomy within the world? Of course, I can't do that. I've taken inspiration by some people. One is Herman Daly, who was a student of the founder of the concept of bioeconomy, Georgescu Rogan. And the way that they present it is that we have our economy and society within a biosphere. And that we heard a lot of people commenting on that yesterday and today. So we depend on our biosphere, hence the title of this session, Biosphere Stewardship. We depend on our biosphere for our primary sources, and we depend on our biosphere also to absorb our waste. Okay. Well, I'm not a professional moderator, can you tell? Okay, I can't even work the clicker. Okay, right. So my role at the Joint Research Center is to coordinate a JRC-wide mandate for the DGs about biomass. So biomass, we know, is the building block of bioeconomy. And there are a lot of findings, a lot of reports, etc. But one picture that we show often is just this summary picture. And the fisheries and algae people hate it because it's all in dry tons, and they get very frustrated that the fish and aquaculture part is very small. But the point is to show that we're producing and sourcing a lot of biomass, true, about 1 billion tons a year. Most of it is from agricultural crops, so this is the economic faction of agricultural crops. A lot from forestry as well. These brown loops that you see are reuse loops. So we're reusing a lot of industrial byproducts from forest industries. We're reusing a lot of bio-waste. If you look up in the orange section, you have an idea of where we're actually using this biomass. 40%, and this actually, these statistics were quoted this morning by DG Environment. This William was talking about 28% of our biomass goes to material uses, 22% to bioenergy, 40% to animal feed and bedding, and only 10% to plant-based food. Okay. So that's fine. What are we doing now with our waste? Well, we're actually getting much better at managing our waste. So not only are we producing less waste, you see, from 148 million tons to 143 million tons, which is good, but we're also recovering more of that waste, which means we're incinerating less. So we're actually recovering it for some other purpose. So the question, this begs the question then, so if we're recycling and reusing more, why are we sourcing more from nature? Shouldn't it be that we are sourcing less because of this circularity? It was commented this morning as well by Monsieur Lemaitre when he said, well, maybe we don't know how to valorize it. This is a question actually also for the panel. Sorry for this. Okay. So essentially what I will ask the panel to present for 5 minutes each is some of their ideas on how we can become good stewards of the earth to ensure sustainable living on this planet. Where do we start? Well, we'll start with our colleague Sivim. Sivim, you are a policy officer at DG Klima, so the European Commission's Director General for Climate Action. You work in the Unit for Land Economy and Carbon Removals, and you are an engineer, yes, from Oxford, so we're very honored to have you here. If you could present 5 minutes about what you think about this question, then that would be...
Sure. So first of all, hello everyone. Nice to be here, and thanks Sarah for the introduction. I mean, we heard about it this morning as well, and now during your introduction too. There's a lot of pressure on the natural resources for all the products and uses, etc., that we have. And if you've seen like all the decarbonization strategies, plans for any kind of sector, you'll figure that a lot of them are relying to bio. So it's always like, oh, chemicals or fossil-based chemicals, let's do it biochemicals, bio construction products, bioplastics, bio energy. So it's all going into this heavy reliance in the next coming decades on our bioeconomy. However, the question is, how do we manage this, all these type of pressures from different sectors? How do we facilitate this decarbonization? But and how do we make this land available as well? And this is not only regarding the availability of the crops or the biomass, but also all the other land pressures coming on top, like solar farms, where we also need the space and in Europe to put these put installations on. At the same time, we're seeing all the reports by the GRC or also by the recent publication of the European Environmental Agency that harvesting more wood within Europe is not really like a way to go. So we need to figure a way of how to deal with all these demands while maintaining existing harvesting levels. The way that that we from the Commission, I mean, I noticed first of all that there's a lot of discussions going on internally on bioeconomy and how to manage these pressures and how to put the right incentives into place as well. Because what comes into play is not only the availability, but also the the material efficiency, how we use our current products and whether we actually need as much in order to build and create what we need, how much is going into waste, and how we can valorize these streams. So material efficiency, circular economy, cascading use. But in order to steward all these processes, there need to be the incentives rightly set, and policy is the area that can give this direction to industry. But at the same time, we've noticed with bioenergy as well, rebound effects is a big concerning factor too. So in all the incentives that we're discussing about in various different departments, there's always this question, how, like, could this lead to rebound effects, and how can we mitigate these risks at the same time? Very interesting discussions. To give you a quick overview on what's happening in the policy area, I mean, policy coherence, first of all, is like a no-brainer. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel, and there's so many things happening in all the different departments beyond DG Klima. So I'm referring to, for example, in my area on carbon removals, in construction products, DG Energy, which is having the sustainability criteria in their RET free, for example. The revised construction product regulation is requiring a completely new set of how product declarations need to be conform or report on environmental indicators. The GRC and RTD with their projects and research informing all these best practices and the challenges respectively. So the DG environment, obviously, with the biodiversity, sustainability aspects of it. So what's happening from our side is sitting all together on a table, not only at the end during the inter-service consultations, if you know, like the processes, but already doing the policy development part of it, where we come together, we look over each other's regulations or proposals, we are part of each other's studies, etc., to get this information stream and the systems thinking per niche policy area together and make them as much integrated with each other as possible. So that's like a little sneak peek into the rest of the insights that I can share.
Thank you, Savim. Yes, we'll hear from you later as well. We'll have some questions for you. Now, I would like to give the floor to Arno, if I may ask La Regista to control the slides, because apparently I've made a mess. Thank you. Arno is a senior research fellow at Stockholm Environment Institute. He is joining us online. His face will appear very soon. He has a very multidisciplinary environmental and natural resources background. He's a specialist in marine and freshwater resource management, fish habitat, limnology, eutrophication. There's a very long list, smart agriculture, disaster risk reduction, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll let him work that into his speech. He's currently working on sustainable fisheries in Thailand, coastal zone restoration in the Caribbean, and EU climate smart agriculture and climate change content in Wikipedia. So welcome, Arno. We are listening to you.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
So the title of this little 5-minute delivery is The Blue Bioeconomy. So we're going to focus on the so-called blue economy part of this discussion today. It's a new name. In fact, blue economy is quite new to most countries around the world. When it comes to the bioeconomy, it's not a new name, really. It's an age-old problem, as to say. Next slide, please. So the blue bioeconomy, which is part of the blue economy, if you like, it really has, you could say it's a novel term, but the marine bioeconomy has been heavily overexploited with the onset of industrial fishing over the past, say, 60 to 70 years. I'm not going to talk about whaling, which goes back to the 1800s. But the FAO estimates that a third of the global fisheries are being harvested at unsustainable levels, and the rest of it are really being fished at maximum capacity. If you look at the bigger picture on the, let's say, blue economy, where fisheries and aquaculture are part of, so that whole economic platform, if you like, including aquaculture, transport, energy, biotech, services of different kinds, carbon sequestration, all of this makes up that the ocean economy is maybe worth somewhere around $2.5 trillion US dollars per year. That's a calculation that's probably debatable, but just to say that there's big things happening in the ocean today. Next slide, please. So recently, and this is really recent, published in Nature, using satellite imagery studies, the data now is showing that about 75% of the industrial fishing boats around the world are not being tracked using public systems. This means that agencies, government agencies, are not aware of about 75% of the fishing effort around the world. The blue part around the EU is actually the best tracked data. It's if you look at the intense red in Asia, South Asia, you can see that the bulk of the I think it's 19,000 or 20,000 fishing boats that were monitored there are not actually seen in the public databases. So there's actually a rather alarming piece of news here that we are not monitoring fishing in many parts of the world. The EU, of course, like I say, is rather well monitored. Next slide. At the same time, we're learning more and more about the importance of the ocean in terms of its capacity to absorb carbon emissions. You can see here the big arrow on the left is the CO2 emissions from our activities, our terrestrial activities on the planet. And then the large capacity that the ocean has, but it can't take it all up. So the ocean contains about 50 times more carbon than the atmosphere, and 20 times more than what we have on land, plants, and soil combined. So this is actually an ocean planet. And it absorbs about 30% of our carbon emissions. So that's that little arrow on the right at the top. It also absorbs heat. And if it wasn't for the oceans, we probably would not be sitting here today with this agenda. We would probably be in an emergency mode about global heating, because it absorbs about 90% of the excess heat caused by global warming. And overfishing, actually, which we're talking about today, it affects the marine diversity and also the carbon sequestration, because we're pulling carbon out of the ocean. Next slide. So under DG MARI, or Maritime Affairs and Fisheries, we have the Common Fisheries Policy within the EU. And it was set up in 1970, very much like CAP for the agriculture. And it didn't really get reformed until just about 10 years ago, about 2013. And this was done to stop the widespread overfishing within Europe. So Europe, at least 10 years ago, had hotspots of overfishing. Now, 10 years later, you can see the latest reports from 22 that there have been some improvements, but there are still several areas that are being heavily overfished. You can see the more purple the diagrams are, the lower the level of sustainability, and the more dark blue, the higher level of sustainability. So the Mediterranean is still being overfished, and you could say that the North Sea and the Baltic Sea are not in a sustainable harvesting mode yet. And really, it's there is some promise of the coast of Spain and the Biscayan Bay there. But otherwise, we have a lot of homework to do. in the EU, just like most countries around the world. Next slide, please. So the last slide is really, I don't know if you can see the complete title there, but it's the abbreviation is BBNJ, and that's the marine biodiversity of areas beyond natural jurisdiction. The UN discussed this and debated it, this treaty, for about 20 years, and it was finally ratified 1 year ago. And it really represents the first attempt to manage areas of the ocean for which no one nation has sole responsibility for management. So this is a big challenge for global governance. In all, we're talking about 40% of the surface of the planet. And that comprises about 64% of the surface of the oceans and about 95% of the volume, because we're talking about deep sea. This is an interesting success story on paper. We don't see anything yet. It will take decades to see what the impacts of this agreement can be. But there are diplomatic aspects, there are economic aspects, and of course, social aspects. And I think every one of us will be affected by this agreement, whether you work terrestrially or whether you work in the oceans. There are benefits in getting involved with this. It will be affecting the global economy as we rely more and more on the oceans for our future sustainability. So I think that's the end of my messages. Thank you.
Thank you, Arno. Very insightful, as always, full of facts and figures. Now we're going to move to land. We have an agronomist here with us who is working with BirdLife. Her name is Marilda. She's leading the agriculture and land program at the BirdLife European Secretariat, where she works on subjects about agriculture, food, bioenergy, and forests. So please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having invited BirdLife. So as you said, BirdLife, it's an organization which core concern is the preservation of biodiversity and especially birds. So I would like to start my speech by stating some facts, is that currently humanity is facing two big crises. It's the biodiversity loss and the climate change. And if we look at the biodiversity is decreasing everywhere on the globe. And this is due to because natural habitats are converted to agriculture, silviculture, for instance, but they are also overexploited. So today we're seeing that natural habitats are overharvested. But any use as logging or cultivation means that less carbon actually it's accumulating than if the land is left freely to evolve into intact ecosystems. So what we're seeing is that relying on bioeconomy, on one hand, well, it is harmful to biodiversity as it leads to overexploitation, but also it aggravates the climate change. So when my colleague here was speaking about policy coherence, we want to see more policy coherence at the EU level, because it is highly unlikely that we will meet the LULUCF target, where on the other end of the spectrum we have the RED, the Renewable Energy Directive, that is more and more, not more and more, but it's incentivizing the use of biomass for energy. So our position is that biomass, it's best used for products than energy. Because when we integrate the opportunity cost, energy doesn't save emissions. On the contrary, actually, it's worse than fossil fuel. When we burn woody biomass, we have calculated that it emits more GHG emission than burning coal. So the only benefit for biomass and for biomass, yes, indeed, is to be used as a material substitution. And the benefits, the more benefits that we will have, is if we have long-lasting materials and not in short-lived, because the short-lived will end up incinerated after months or years. And in parallel to the replacement of fossil fuel-based products, we urgently need policies that reduce demand. We are burning 50%, so half of the wood that is harvested, it's burned. And we cannot sustain this level of demand. So in order to reduce demand, we need to apply different policies, such as the cascading principle. So indeed, use biomass first for the material. We need to move to a circular economy. Indeed, we need to reduce, first of all, we need to reduce waste. We need to be more efficient in the way we use our biomass. Also produce products that can be easily recycled. And with all these different policies, we will be able to reduce today the demand that it's too high in comparison to what we can supply. And I would also say that forests did do better. So we see that in Europe, forests have expanded. But forests did do better because we found other sources of energy. We replaced wood with coal. And now we want to do exactly the opposite. It's replace wood with coal. And this, of course, replace coal with wood. And well, this, if we do that, it will lead to the same deforestation and degradation. We cannot go back to pre-industrial times. When we see, for instance, in France, the forest reached its lowest area it was in the 19th century, 18th century. And since we used other type of energies, the forest in France is expanding. So as I said, we cannot go back to pre-industrial times. We need to move to the future. And today, the future, it's roll out the wind and solar energy, real renewables. And finally, I would also want to say that we put a lot of our focus into the carbon and the fact that biomass is storing, forests are storing carbon. This is true, but forests, they provide other ecosystem services for people well-being. I'm thinking about the recreational services. So in France, they have calculated that this service, it's 10,000 more important in terms of value than just using forest for the wood. So it's extremely important to also broaden a bit the scope of how forests are important for people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilda. You mentioned two crises, biodiversity and climate. I think we'll hear from our next panel. Also, I don't know if I would define as a crisis, but possibly the topic of equity and justice as well. Marta is working at the FAO for the United Nations. That's the Food and Agricultural Organization, for those who do not know. She is a senior expert to the program on bioeconomy at the FAO for sustainable food and agriculture. So please.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening from those online that may have been joining from other parts of the world. I'm Marta Gomez, and thank you so much also for inviting FAO to this very important and critical debate. Maybe 2 words on where I come from, because it's a bit out of, I guess, different to the other participants sometimes. We are United Nations, and we have 196 members, governments. So we work really with everyone. We have 130 offices everywhere with projects and technologies on the ground that I will maybe have some examples later. So I just want to bring these different or perspectives on the table, right? And today I want to, for example, speak a lot on indigenous communities, indigenous knowledge, local communities, because hasn't been maybe so much mentioned these days. Okay, first a positive word. I think we are on the right path because we see events like this, but also the biodiversity and climate COPs, or the Global Bioeconomy Summit, which will be this year, the Summit of the Future of the UN. So many events that are including bioeconomy, and we'll discuss how the world is changing very fast. And how bioeconomy can be an opportunity that copes at the same pace. So we have to continue doing this. Okay, so in FAO we have a program on bioeconomy. We have been working since 2015, but our members decided that it was a priority for us to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, and made it a priority for the next 10 years, so until the Sustainable Development Goals are active, right? So it's a 10-year program until 2031, and we focus a lot on natural resources management, on reducing pollution and bio inputs and other cleaner alternatives, and on waste management, and more than management, valorization and adding value to the resources, right? So on that one, maybe I just want to recall the cascading use and adding value that you mentioned. There is 1/3 of what we produce that is lost or wasted, produced for food. Imagine for even other uses like bioenergy, I don't know. So it's really, yeah, we can consume less, of course, and we have to, but also 1/3 is lost or wasted, you know? Anyway, so it's really big numbers. So I just want to what I said before. I want to focus a little bit on the social part. You mentioned sustainability before, but there are 3 main elements of sustainability: environment, social, and economic. Sustainability, and also good governance principles. So in FAO we have 10 principles and 24 criteria for sustainable bioeconomy, and we have them in these 4, let's say, areas. So not only environment as a sometimes externality that some people measure. No, it's from the beginning, it's from the design that you have to consider environment, social, sustainability, and economic and good governance. So please cut me if I am too long. Okay, so I can give some examples of some projects that we have on the ground, and you cut me whenever my time is over.
Another minute.
Okay, so there are many positive examples, but I also want to say there is challenges everywhere, right? So for example, Africa has a problem with land tenure sometimes. For example, women, sometimes they don't own the land, they don't have land tenure, so they cannot maybe decide on what to do. Use of waste is then an important maybe element for them. So we have some new projects on textiles using leaves from pineapple and banana plantations, which are already actually very much used in Japan and some other countries in centuries, and is getting a market in new countries. We have, for example, in Zanzibar, women seaweed farmers. They are also farmers. That because of climate change, the seaweed were dying, so they had to invent other ways of harvesting those algae that were in more deeper and colder waters, but also other types of algae that were didn't have much value. But they found a way to make soaps, shampoos, or other bio-based products and they were exporting those at the end of the project. What else we have in South Africa, Namibia? A lot of work on the genetic resources of their plants and biomass, and also the knowledge. So not the plants or the genetic material, but also the knowledge. And so having access and benefit sharing agreements or shared patents or share the benefits, right, of those with the private companies. And in that, I want to mention there is also, as I said, many events or even international treaties arising, and I think there is a lot of work that has been done in the past years, even if we don't realize. I know the WIPO, the World International Patent Organization, is going to publish or agree on a treaty on that supports genetic material, but also knowledge, traditional and indigenous knowledge as a source and a resource. So, anyways, I can continue giving examples, but I don't want to.
Well, you'll have the opportunity because I'm going to ask you something that is very related to your discourse right now. But I would like to first ask Sivin, we heard both from Marilda and now from Marta about the importance of transforming biomass into long-lasting products for substitution, etc. May I ask you to comment on this specifically? What do they mean and what do you mean by
Yeah,
that?
totally. I really like the interventions. First of all, thank you for mentioning these points. And it's not really that there are more incentives for short-term products like energy. It's more that there are no incentives for long-term products. What the good news is that with the carbon removal certification framework, if you've been in the session before, Christian had mentioned it shortly. So the carbon removal certification framework which has been recently adopted, sets the standard of how a quality carbon removal project should look like. So when we think about carbon removals, we tend to think of greenwashing immediately. And when we think of carbon removals, we should think of activities like carbon farming, afforestation, re-wetting wetlands, more sustainable agricultural practices to store more carbon in the soil, as well as permanent removals, so BECCS and DUCs, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, direct air capture and storage, but also carbon storage in products. So that is my specific expertise area. This means that with this certification framework, which not only sets the standard of how a quality carbon removal should look like, so provides an equal playing field for companies or farmers that have been trying to do good practices in the first way, but kind of get lost in the market because of all this greenwashing that has been going on. It will provide an equal playing field in the market for all of them, setting the standard not only how a good carbon removal project should look like, but also the respective sustainability standards, biodiversity standards with it. So in looking specifically at carbon storage and products, we're developing a certification methodology that building owners could then use to claim the carbon storage benefits of their buildings. This means that if a building owner, instead of using cement, is opting for bio-based products, whereas here I want to quickly add a parenthesis that bio-based products goes beyond wood. There's a lot of innovation happening in the respective construction industry on different types of construction products based on agricultural crops as well, based on waste agricultural residues, etc. There's a lot of things happening in that sector too. So when thinking of biomass, it goes beyond wood. I cannot highlight it enough to my construction industry, but also like to broaden the horizon in that respect. But essentially what this certification methodology does is setting the incentive for the demand for building owners or construction companies to opt in for bio-based products instead of cement. And opens the opportunity for new business models in that respect as well. So we really want to reward the farmers or actors, companies in the forefront of this entire innovation sphere as well, to do the right choices and facilitate that as well. While safeguarding sustainability practices, I cannot highlight this enough. It's a big factor of our discussions that are taking place with fellow colleagues from other departments, but also with our expert group. And in my case, for example, it goes not only into sustainably harvesting, but also that the wood that is used then, or the bio-based material that is used in the building, is ending up in a sustainable building and not in one that's well, doesn't have a good energy standard and is unsustainable in the first place. So we're really trying to, first of all, cross-reference as many different initiatives as possible in this regard, like the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which now allows, with the revised updated version, to provide the carbon storage capacity in the energy performance certificate of the building. So, you know, like this A to E type of labeling will allow building owners to also provide the carbon storage capacity of it. But essentially, we're tapping into this completely new sphere. We started talking about ocean removals as well and see how that can be incentivized in that sense. But it's a new area, a new type of thinking, new type of business practices that we're talking about here, completely different innovation space. And over-regulation is something that should be carefully avoided in that respect. So I come from an entrepreneurial family. I've used to work for a startup incubator before as well, and I kind of grew up in this innovation space of keeping your mind open for new ideas, for and looking for solutions more than for challenges. Because as part of this new journey that we all embark in bioeconomy as a business models, there is unavoidably a lot of uncertainty coming, a lot of risks that business owners are going to take with the new practices that they're adopting as well. We need to be aware that new changes come with a certain amount of uncertainties. And from a policy perspective, we need and we are trying to do the best to set the right framework for it without over-regulation though, because the ideas are coming from industry, the new business models and what you can do is coming from the industry in the end, and they're the people who are implementing it. So this cross collaboration and working together in order to figure out that way, and also them telling me like, hey, if you put it this way, this would enable me to work better with this incentive, for example, is something that's part of our working processes. And something that we keep on trying to do to put the right incentives into place as well.
I hate to cut you off because it's,
I could talk.
My father always said, "Ask a small question, you get a big." No, but very interesting.
I could talk for it for.
I'm
like
sure,
really.
and we'll have the opportunity also through the questions. Now, I would like to go to Arno, if possible. You were talking about harvesting in forests. Now we're going to talk about harvesting in the oceans. Arno, what have been the outcomes and impacts of different policy institutional arrangements to achieve a more sustainable EU fishery since 2013? We're talking about stewardship here of the ocean.
Thank you for that question. It does relate very closely to what we're talking about across the whole span, from birds to forests to food. And so we had our fingers crossed when the reform of the common fishery policy was carried out in 2013. And we hoped that the EU would take a global lead on sustainable exploitation of fish and shellfish. But 10 years later, the report shows that the models being used are pretty old-fashioned. The model that is used is like an old forestry model. It's based on exploitation. It's called the maximum sustainable yield, MSY. It's used globally. It was invented by the US after World War II. It's an exploitation model, and basically it tests the ecosystem until it nearly collapses. Unfortunately, so what has happened over the last 10 years is that there's has been some reduction in overfishing within the EU zone. And the deadline for implementation, if you like, of sustainable practices, that was 2020. So we have a partial success, but as I showed in the map, there are certain areas that are still heavily overfished, and that's the Mediterranean. The Baltic is not doing well. Most of the cod fishery there is collapsed. Herring fishery is collapsing. It's overexploited. The North Sea is an interesting case where it rebounds let's say, faster because of its connections to the Atlantic. But there are some stocks that are heavily overexploited. So it's not a good report. The incentives for doing sustainable fishing are not there. I don't know what they could possibly be. I would hate to see subsidies. I think we're not paying enough attention to the sensitivity of ecosystems. Aquaculture, of course, is a way out. But in many cases, the fish being cultured in aquaculture are being fed fish from, let's say, poor countries that don't police their coastal zones. So sometimes when you eat salmon that's farmed in the EU, it's actually you're eating other fish that should have been consumed maybe by people in other countries.
Thank you.
So it's not a sustainable model, just to say, be very open about it.
Thank you, Arno. Thank you for being so honest. Yes, for voicing what we know, and yeah, with a lot of scientific evidence to support your statements as well. Turning now to Marilda, do you think that biodiversity conservation and bioeconomy growth are compatible?
I think that I would like to start with giving you some figures. And it comes from a report that was done by Material Economics, I think. So they have estimated that currently we are facing a 40 to 70% gap in supply in order to reach the demand for bioproducts, bioenergy. This is huge. This gap, it's really, really huge. And it's extremely important to mention that, because the room for increasing harvesting biomass, whether it is from agriculture or forest, I'm talking about, it's very limited if we want to do it in a sustainable way. Sustainable way meaning that we take into account the physical limitations. Because if we take into account the physical limitations, we are living in a finite world, which is not always taken into account by economy. This means also that there's at the end. So in order to match this gap, it's very, very difficult. And especially if, on the other hand, we are serious about tackling the biodiversity crisis. And in order to tackle the biodiversity crisis, we need to restore forests. We need to give back land to nature. And let's assume that, okay, we will still continue to use land. Then what is really, really important is, first, it's what you harvest. For instance, there is a project with our Polish partner. They are preserving the aquatic warblers in peatlands, and in order to maintain these habitats open, the peat and actually the reeds and the bushes needs to be cut. But these reeds and bushes, so far, they're not used for construction, for the building sector, or for compost, for instance. So there is still room there to better use what you harvest. Then it's the question of where you harvest. If you are harvesting old growth forest, this is not sustainable. But if we're harvesting the increment of afforested land where there is over stock, then what it's really important to know is how you harvest this overstock. Because so far, the first we were doing, it's clear cuts, rotational clear cuts. And clear cuts are extremely harmful, either for biodiversity, but also for the climate aspect, because you leave the soil just bare, and all the emissions are also coming from the soil. And then, as I said, what is extremely important is to stop clear cuts, make thresholds, and turn to more close to nature type of forestry. And in the end, it matters what you use this biomass for. And as I said, it's extremely important to develop more the long-lasting products and markets. So to end volume matters, because we need to base the bioeconomy on what we have and not what we want.
Very nice answer. Thank you so much. Also for bringing concrete examples into the discussion. Marta, one important aspect of sustainability is, we say in the European Union, just transition. That's what we call it. So leaving no one behind. And I wanted to ask you if you could identify ways, either through governance or others' interactions, to ensure that, but at a global level.
Difficult question. Um, yes, well, in FAO we started the work on bioeconomy for this reason. In 2015 or so, we saw a lot of bioeconomy strategies popping up, and it was great, but almost no one was from Africa or from Asia, from Latin America. So we wanted to leave no one behind and try to make those countries also have a strategy or a plan or a program that understands the resources and decide what to, how and with whom to play, I guess, in the global market. In these principles and criteria I mentioned before, the first one is on food security. So it's also for very important to have this as in the cascading news as the first one. But there is just transition is really important, but sometimes we think there are gaps where there aren't, or we can learn from each other a lot. So I really think that global governance and partnerships, having a global home for the bioeconomy or more exchanges is crucial, because Europe can learn a lot from Latin America, from Thailand or Malaysia, or many business models, I think, are happening in many places. And maybe what you mentioned, having who would benefit or maybe have an incentive here and there may create some business models or value chains in somewhere else. So I think there is not a gap so much in the knowledge, because there are different types of knowledge, as I mentioned before, but more on talking to each other and collaborating more, and maybe having new ideas together. So just a last point, I think there is different levels for this governance. I talk about the global one, but of course there is the national strategies and coordination groups, territorial development and planning. So also at territory level, you need ideally a bioeconomy dedicated group that works on it. And yes, and even at value chain, or as we say, value web level. So these different industries that together they use the biomass from one to another and have an ecosystem, I guess, of businesses and products. So it's governance, yes, at global level, because we work at that, but also at many others, and feedback loops, I think, between them. And I forgot to mention in the introduction, also this year the G20 has a dedicated initiative on the bioeconomy. So because I didn't want to not mention it. Again, things are moving, and I think in the right direction.
Thank you. Yeah, your intervention opens up for a lot of different, so we think of intellectual property issues when we're thinking of cross-fertilization across global south, global north, risk of neocolonization. So when I heard the young ambassador speak from Guatemala saying, "You're so far ahead," I was thinking, are we? Because I think we can also learn, in fact, from the many traditional land management and indigenous land management practices. I would like to show the slide with the Slido QR, because we have a question. Actually, we're a little bit behind on time, so I'll be super quick with this now. We want to open a poll for the audience, either here and, well, not either, but for people in the room and online. The question is this: how do you think the EU bioeconomy could address the multiple pressures on land and sea? Now, I would invite you to type in here. Meanwhile, maybe what we can do is go to questions. What do you think, Noah? Or shall we, while people are typing? Yes? That way we maybe recover. I'm going to have to ask that the questions are all put on Slido. We have to do that so that we have equal treatment between the people online and the people in the room. Oh, does that happen? Oh my goodness. I asked the boss, what do we do if we have a very long question? Well, let's start with a short one. Thank you. Okay, so they won't appear. Thank you. Okay, well, since we finished with Marta, let's start again with her. We have a question. Oh, I've just lost it because with Slido things move around. Okay, in Bolivia, there's a law of the rights of Mother Earth that protects ecosystems under policy. The question is, how can we adopt this in the EU? I don't know if we want to reformulate the question is, should we, or what do you think about adopting that in the EU?
That's exactly my point. I'm not to decide what the EU should adopt, but do they know about it in the EU? Can they learn from it? The same from Brazil or India. Also, they are protecting so much of the products that they enter in as global trade that they are sure it was not that if there is any benefit to share, they stay within their country. It's a mechanism that is in Europe. It doesn't exist, so maybe it's not of interest. But do they know there is this issue with the patenting in these other countries? Do they want to do the same? So the same for Bolivia, same for also Peru. Is true that they are really putting Mother Earth or at the center. So it's mainstream. So anything you do, you have to consider it. We do that for gender, for youth, but maybe in Europe they don't do it for Mother Earth. So it's just, again, learning from each other.
Okay.
I'm not to decide who should do what.
There's a very different but related question. Also, I will start with Sevim because she alluded to the content that's in this question. With the constant focus on incentives, competitiveness, and profitability, are we not falsely still relying on the markets to resolve our multiple crises? Good luck.
I think this is a very philosophical question, and we could go over it for hours, because I mean, there is a difference between the ideal world and the real world. And in the ideal world, I would completely subscribe to this. Now, like, yes, we don't need this growth models. We don't need, like, to focus on money and monetizing everything so much. But the real world, as we heard in the previous panel as well, is just different, and it is a system that's currently based on exploitation, as we talked about earlier as well. It's a system where only business and money gets the ball rolling as well. And in this entire sustainability discussion, and no matter how much I love Mother Earth and how much I care about it, it's just not the language that majority of the people talk, businesses, industries talk. So we need to adapt our narratives regarding these as well. We need to set the incentives to make them act in a specific way as well. So to summarize, while I wish that wouldn't be necessary in the which would be the ideal world, it's not our current situation right now. And we just, in order to make stuff happen, we need to work with what we have. And sometimes that is not always a perfect solution, but we need to get the ball rolling. Everything will be better than what we are doing right now.
I think for the last question, there was someone in the room who expressed that she had a very long question, or may we take it? Because on Slido, I think it's a bit limited, that's all.
Thank you for your interesting insights, first of all, and thank you for giving me the floor. I just wanted to provide a fast example concerning terrestrial ecosystems in order to contextualize my question. So, for instance, ecosystems are shifting in both altitude and location due to climate change, creating a bottleneck effect for species. And this is increasing their already exacerbated vulnerability despite their apparent expansion of the forest, for instance, as reported recently by FAO. The way we intend to restore our forests may not be enough. As we've mentioned multiple times throughout the past few days, comprehensive strategies are vital to tackle such complexity, but most importantly, the leverage points that we choose to prioritize for effective intervention within complex systems is even more important. And Donella Meadows and the Club of Rome already highlighted this back in the 70s, so it is not a new concept. How is bioeconomy adapting to scientific evidence and concerns, and what leverage points is it currently focusing on to intervene in such complexity? Because feedback loops and material flows and information nodes are not the most effective places to intervene.
Wow. It is, yes. I mean, I think I would start by not answering because I'm the moderator, right? Okay, let's. Although, Marilda, would you like to start with that, or yeah?
It goes a bit with what I said. Indeed, yes, there is, and there are a lot of physical limitations to what ecosystem can provide, without jeopardizing the integrity of such natural habitats. So, I mean, for us, it's extremely important to keep that in mind and to integrate this into the different economic models that we do. And I think that indeed, as you said, there is a real market there, but policies influence these markets. So when you give the right incentives or with concrete policies, you can actually develop certain sectors and not the others. But for me, it's extremely important really to keep in mind physical limitations and also including the fact that with the climate change, all these spruce plantations or new plantations that we do after clear cutting the forest are extremely vulnerable to heat, to drought. In general, these are the first trees and forests to burn. So this we need not only to take into account the fact that we cannot over harvest, but also we need to take to adapt the techniques and the way we take the biomass.
Thank you. We're supposed to wrap up, but I see there's one question here that.
Not anyway. Yes, I would like to make a comment on the rights of nature because I think there are many myths around that. Ecuador was the first state in the world that declared the rights of nature in its constitution. But nevertheless, there has been several cases before courts, and these rights are not being enforced. And also in Bolivia. Bolivia in its constitution also says that the natural resources will be exploited for the economic development of the country. So there is a lot of misunderstanding about the rights of nature, even when it is being said that maybe in Europe we could take this example. I'm not saying that we cannot learn from other countries, but these rights are very linked to the cosmovision of indigenous populations, people that lives in the forest, eats from the forest. We are not in Western countries, we are not in that situation. In Europe, we do have a lot of protection for nature within the Birds Directive, the Habitats Directive, now the regulation on the regeneration of nature, which are the rights of nature, right to protection, right to regeneration. And in Europe, we don't need that. What we need is a stronger institutions that enforce the laws. And in Spain, we have a case which is the Mar Menor. When you talk about rights of nature, you talk about granting legal personality to a specific ecosystem. But legal personality also entails obligations. So when you have legal personality, it's not only about obligations, about rights, but also about obligations. The case of Mar Menor in Spain, it's because the Nitrates Directive, a 1991 directive, it has not been applied correctly and enforced, even the Water Framework Directive. So we have a lot of regulation. We don't need to create more institutions because that makes, we are providing or devoting more resources to all this kind of guardianship within those kind of rights of nature. But what we need is to provide more resources to like water authorities and to many other things that we already have. Sometimes I feel that we are inventing the wheel, and the wheel has been already invented. And finally, I would like also to mention that even many people talk about cases in the US. There are the case of Lake Eyre that the Supreme Court said that that was unconstitutional. So people talk about things, but just without knowing in depth the things. So please, I think that we need more reflection about what it's being told in general and what it works. I'm not against rights of nature for indigenous people that has this communion with nature and they live in those areas. I respect that. But we need to be clear what we need in a Western culture and what it's going to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that intervention. I'm sorry we don't have time for questions, any more questions, but do we have time? Can we? No. If fine, yes.
Yeah. So
I can't say no. This is so interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. How to avoid paradigm shifts, as we were discussing.
You need the microphone, I'm sorry. Yeah. Don't worry.
Now it should? Okay.
Yes, it's fine. Yeah.
How can we avoid burden shifts in the legislative process, for example, for CRC, or in any other of your experiences so far? Like I really invite the whole panel to just share some ideas on this. Like which kind of examples can you bring on the table that worked or that you think that could work? Or what do you expect from civil society, from scientists, or from institutions or industries, as you were discussing? Because it's about a proactive attitude. Thank you.
Can you answer that very quickly?
Yeah, so
thank you.
So if I understand the question correctly, you're asking about examples for carbon removal projects? So these are farmers, for example, adopting certain processes in order to improve the soil quality, which then can store more carbon. Afforestation projects within Europe, re-wetting peatlands. I mean, we just heard an example from Marilda as well about this in Poland. And then also building owners, instead of opting for fossil fuel intensive construction materials, using more bio-based materials, and that's being certified. For example, in France, it's already happening. Netherlands, the Nordics are very good in that regard already. But what our certification adds to this is specific sustainability criteria in order to ensure that the whole systems perspective is taken into account as well.
Thank you. Sivim will be here if you want to go deeper. I'm very sorry to cut this off because, actually I'm supposed to summarize with take-home messages. I will leave this up, or thank you for putting this up for people to digest, because every comment is relevant. But one point that it comes to my mind when I want to wrap up is, and Marta also touched upon this, is the importance of inclusion and democratization in policy making. In fact, to hear all of these voices. So I think that would be my main take home if I were to ask myself what that is. And that's very important for stewardship, because stewardship is about our relationship to where we're living, the space that we're living in. Another take home that I have from a few of you, in particular Arno, was models and indicators have to be realistic and fit for purpose. not necessarily realistic, but fit for purpose. And this comes back to your question about the leverage points, because if you take out a keystone a species, that's going to have a bigger impact than if we remove a lesser species, if anyone wants to declare that one species is lesser than another. So this is important in terms of being able to identify what are these leverage points. And then we talked about incentives. Incentives are good. Why would anyone? Yes, I'm being told to wrap up really, really quickly. What is the incentive of good Earth stewardship? Well, it goes beyond financial incentives, but in the world we live in now, we heard from Sevim that at times we do have to work within the situation that we're living in right now. I think I have no time to go on, even though I have many points noted, but we will write a report, correct? And you will see, I think, a lot of these thoughts compiled in written form. Thank you so much for coming. And I'm sorry we didn't have hours to talk, but we're still here. Yes, if you would like to continue the conversation offline. Thank you. Goodbye. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. In fact, yes.
I'm supposed to write a report, so you can send me
Ideas for
You are writing the report.
at least
I will help.
I'm taking some
Yes,
notes
we will
actually,
help you. Yeah, of course.
and I will send it immediately. So